So we'll try and do a stop
relating
at
to sugar
11:15
that are not
rather than
necessarily
11:10. That should
this
give us
big way
plenty
that
of time
sugar
for
has
the
been
discussion.
related to
Right.
historically.
So again,
Well,
I
let's
invite
see
any of
if
the
our panel
panelists
picks
to
up
ask
any of
each
those
other a
same
question,
themes.
and
We're going
in
to go back to
particular, I
Christ
wonder if
Chapel
our two
now, where
presenters
we
have
have the
questions
entire
they'd like
panel on
to
stage,
ask of
starting
each
to
other
take questions
before the,
from you
before I
all
turn
in
to
the
audience
audience. So
questions.
going back live now
Anyone?
to the Nobel conference.
Professor Hu.
Yeah, quick question for Professor Bosma. You mentioned Silk Road. So I was wondering what's the kind of role Silk Road played in the sugar trade, because I don't know which part of Asia produced sugar before the Caribbeans, and how that kind of Silk Road, because primarily used for spices and other things during that time. I didn't know sugar was also part of the trade.
I think that what I try to do in my book and my research is to decenter the Atlantic realm a bit and to talk about Asia. And in my current research, I'm trying even to make one step further and to look for all kinds of sources which can explain to us what happened in Asia in terms of trade and consumption. There's a whole world in Asia of sugar that has not been noticed. But if you look in all travelogues of the early 19th century, you can read that there are huge traffic of camels, of goats, horses, mules, whatever, in Asia. And I think it's a fascinating story that also needs to be told. And it is also, when we talk about the Asian miracle or the resurgence of China, etc. I mean, China was a very important economic power in the 17th, 18th, early 19th century. So this is what I also want to talk in my story. Yeah.
Other questions? Okay, let's see. Let me turn to some of the questions from the audience. First of all, I guess, for each of you, what do you think are how do we receive these lessons that you've offered us this morning? What are some of the most important ways that we as individuals, as consumers of sugar, can incorporate and appropriate those ideas? Professor Bosma, you spoke to the fact that history can offer us an understanding that this is not simply an individual problem, of course, and yet we are individuals operating in these systems. How can we, as individuals, take on this information and work with it and think with it?
Well, I have a simple answer. That is vote for the politicians who are in favor of a sugar tax, to start with. So this is what we can do immediately. So it's a political issue. The second thing which we also can do is get away from the idea that obesity is a kind of a result of individual indulgence. I think we have really to shift the focus from the individual to the collective responsibility. I think it's also fair to do that. So the food patterns, the whole food system, that is something which is a part of our economy. You cannot expect from an individual person to cope with that. So I think these are two most important things. And that, I think, at that stage the historian comes in, because through history you can show how we arrived at this point and how this sugar predicament came about.
And Ming, would you like to switch places with, it's
to
very
read the
difficult to hear up here, and I told En-Ming we were going to reorganize the speakers, and I put her farther away than before. Are you okay?
It's okay.
Are you sure? Are you sure? I'm just deeply aware of that. Professor Casimir, do you have thoughts about how we take on and as individuals think about the magnitude of the lessons from the counterplantation that you offer us?
To my mind, the first position I think individuals should take when you look at the history of Haiti is never imagine that the oppressed has no agency. You must try to understand how is it negotiating as an oppressed person? Because the production of a commodity implies the participation of people. And those people do not participate just for the sake of it, no? And without having an awareness of it. Now, the people are aware of it. For instance, I try to show the big divide between the state action, the state function, the bureaucracy function, and the people in their private lives. No, but the global population is aware of it. Let me give you, I'm sorry, an example, rather musical, of my mother, who told me that the military réveillé, what the military play with the bugles in the morning to wake up everybody to start working, is a song that in the French they call le réveillé, no? Un réveil militaire. No? And it says, for instance, pam 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 pam. Le réveillé. Okay. People put a word on that. In my case, my mother would tell me they are saying, when I was a policeman, I ignore my mother. Lem te gat police, moi te bliye maman. I mean by that, when I am doing the job of the state, please don't stand in front of me, mother, because I am another person. I am the state. You are the civilians. That reflects the situation of Haiti. I mean, the fragility, the frailty of the population, but they are reacting. So first of all, they are aware of that. So the position is quite important when they are negotiating. People are aware of what the state is doing, even though they may not be able to react. That's the first element. The second element is that as an individual, obviously, one thing is participate in global consumption, other thing to taking care of your community life. Now, in some societies, state is built with the participation of individuals. In other societies, like in Haiti, in colonized countries in general, the individuals appear because the community protects them. If not, the state will crush them. They will have no possibility to reproduce them. The state gives them another memory. Your family gives you another memory. Your ancestors, my grandmother doesn't know how to read and write. Nonetheless, if I dare to disrespect her, they beat me up until, you said, because the community will not allow that. No? And I like to give the story of given to me by an anthropologist friend of mine, whose friend is a priest, and the priest is going to be nominated to be bishop in the Catholic Church. And the priest answered, well, give me a few days to think about it, I will answer you. And in those few days, he escaped rapidly to the mountain to speak with the head of the family, who was the voodoo priest of the family, and say, I am being proposed to be bishop. What do I say? And the voodoo priest thought, say, okay, you accept it. He cannot accept the position in the church without consulting the head of his family. He will dare not doing that. You see my point? So this mixture of two systems, two ways of seeing the world is part of the agency of the oppressed. You see, and this is very difficult, but this is what you must see. On the third thing I think is unavoidable, you don't help people. You have to, if you help people, it's to help people to be themselves, not to become you. You see, state, and in general, being them, whatever state you have, they have interest. No, if they say they are assisting you, it's because they have self-interest behind that you don't see. So this is what is in negotiation, self-interest. No, and you must admit that he has an interest and you have your interest. No? And the Haitians want to be Haitian. They do not want to be something else. No? Same thing, the US want to be the US with their history, and this must be respected. So what we have and what I want to convey is indeed, we must try to have a world where other worlds are possible. And we individuals, we must accept that the other individual is not us. He is different, full stop. So this is the ethical part of it. It is not scientific, it's just ethical. You choose to do that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think a number of the questions are inviting us in one way or another to imagine other worlds, not perhaps with the starkness of modernity versus the counter-plantation, but I think this next question speaks to that. How might we better counter propaganda in the guise of science? How do we create counter-narratives that enable us to respond to what's being touted as propaganda, what is being touted as science, but is often, in fact, a special interest of a non-scientific body. And that might be a question that many would like to address.
I would like to hear from Professor Hu what he thinks about this fake, or fake. The word fake is, of course, a loaded word here, but in the United States. But this propaganda under the guise of science, or just, well, I think it's sufficient for the sugar industry to sow doubt. It's not this just doubting the results of science. But I would really like to hear your point about this.
Yeah, I think tobacco is a good example of that, because in the early 1950s,
feel free to point out.
1950s, 1960s, when studies began to show that tobacco smoking was associated with increased risk of lung cancer and other chronic diseases. Of course, there is a huge pushback from the tobacco industry. And first, of course, is denial. And then they started their own research, in-house research. And then much of those, the research results were kept secret because they actually showed harmful effects of tobacco in their own studies, and then began to push out a lot of smoke screens, so muddy the water, make it very confusing. So, of course, I mean, there are a lot of similarities that have occurred in other areas. For example, SSBs, sugary beverages. So, I mean, as I mentioned yesterday, the SSB, the soft drink industry, sponsored some studies, and those studies tend to conclude that there is no relationship between SSB consumption and obesity. And then, of course, they have funded researchers to go out and then cast doubt on other studies that have found a harmful effect of SSBs. This is pretty, it's not uncommon in nutritional sciences. So I think the main goal of this type of research or industry-funded speakers, I think their main goal is to cast doubt on the validity of scientific research, and then create confusion in the general public, and also among policymakers, because if the argument is that the science is not solid, how can we develop policies based on this kind of science? But fortunately, in the area of added sugar and SSBs, I mean, the science has been very solid. Yeah. And also the number of studies funded by public money, public funding, much greater than the studies, the negative studies sponsored by the industry. So I think this is a good situation in which that the rigorous science, I think, kind of make the policymakers much easier to develop and adopt more evidence-based policies. So that's why the FDA revised the nutrition facts labels to include the amount of added sugar on the labels, and then that's why the USDA dietary guidelines recommend no more than 10% of calories from added sugar. The WHO also adopted this guideline. But again, I think it has always been the case that, I mean, the smoke screen and also muddy the water by certain interest groups try to distort the science and also make the process of translating science into policies much more challenging and takes much more time.
Thanks. I mean, I would observe as a non-scientist that our lives as non-scientists has gotten easier. There is so much opportunity for us to get access to really high-quality science, written for people like us who are not PhDs in epidemiology, right? There is a lot of noise out there, and there is a lot of really high-quality information, and opportunities like this are great times to say, what should I be reading? And I encourage you to share ideas with each other. I think this next couple of questions kind of go together, and I'm pretty sure that one of them comes from my class, and I'm so happy. And that is, some people may be under the impression that colonialism and neocolonialism are things of the past. How do you see modern colonialism? And a separate but I think related question is, what do you know, Dr. Bosma, in particular about sugarcane production in places like Maharashtra, despite the promises of large companies like Coke and Pepsi to make audits of their suppliers for labor injustices, what can only be seen as forced labor, really brutal, inhumane forced labor was written about in the New York Times last year, continues in places like that. So can you help us to understand the present-day realities of forced labor in places like Maharashtra, and also the ongoing colonialism and neocolonialism of many parts of the world, including this one?
And the Dominican Republic.
And the Dominican Republic.
Because the Biden administration at a certain stage, I think it was 2 years ago, banned sugar from the Dominican Republic because of the grave abuse and exploitation of the workers from Haiti. People are indebted often, and the debts make people vulnerable. And there are always recruiters who make use of that, and they send people from the interior to Maharashtra, that is West India, which is one of the largest sugar belts in the world, where cane is still cut manually, in contrast to most places in the world where it's done by these machines, these big machines, precisely because their labor is so cheap that it's not interesting for the sugar factories to send in the combines into the fields. So the most terrible circumstances, over 45 years now there have been journalists, NGOs, activists, academics who have protested against what's going on, and not much is changing there. In Brazil, the situation is slightly better since Lula, the president of Brazil, tried to send the combines, the cane harvests into the field, and also because people in São Paulo began to protest against the way the cane was cut, first setting the fields ablaze and then send the cane cutters in. So there was a combination of environmental concerns by the São Paulo elite in Brazil and the Lula government, which started a gradual outphasing of manual cane cutting. But manual cane cutting is something which really should disappear from this world, because it's inhuman. People will be dehydrated, they will get kidney diseases, their bodies will be demolished within 8 years' time. So this is something which we really should get rid of. And then we talk about neocolonialism, or in the case of some countries, internal colonialism, that the elites of these former sugar colonies take over the role of the metropolitan planters and continue the same kind of abuses, and that's what we see in the island of Hispaniola. The elites of the Dominican Republic severely exploit the labor of the people from Haiti.
Yes, actually, there is not much I would add to what you said. The problem is the following. The difficulty faced by Haitians to counter internal colonialism. I mean, because the chasm between the way the peasant is living and the demands of modernity to absorb them is so big. Therefore, the possibility of keeping them poor and exploiting them is to make sure you can destroy their provision grounds, the production of their food sovereignty. And this food sovereignty is very varied. But the way you can destroy it, for instance, and I think by that Clinton gave a good example, is to sell them in Haiti, let's say, subsidized rice from the US. And the peasant who is not subsidized rice, his rice has to fund and cannot compete on the market. So you destroy the whole set of the revenue the peasant may have, no? And you introduce cheap labor force. Now, if you want to maintain that, even when the peasant is withdrawing to his small village economy, what you do, you create a group of bandits, you call them, no, to destroy the internal market. So the bandits started indeed from the city, but they enter blocking the arrival of food toward the center of communication. Not only they make the food more expensive, but on the other hand, no, they're trying to make sure that this food has no market to be distributed. So that's another aspect of. Now, to counter that, you have to make sure that you can absorb the protests of the peasant to the state. This is very difficult for the very simple reason that it is now the protest of the people, their agency, is now backed up by very highly accessible technology. For instance, when Haiti received the bonbons, I would say, the immense help from Venezuela in a set of money to apply to its own development, even infrastructure, the elite come out, the oligarchy, and took the money. And for the people to protest, they have in hand the WhatsApp and the technology of the mobile phone, no? The handphone. And they make a strike which gives you the whole country stop in 1 minute, and the government has to really shake up and take that into account. So what is happening now, another way of thinking, of seeing the world, is crossing with the technological development that is becoming more and more accessible and allows really the operationalization of the people agency. You see what I mean? And therefore you have new possibilities to negotiate and to discuss in the battle against internal colonialism, which in my case I would call also neocolonialism.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Phil, but I just want to throw out to the audience a question for you to think about over the lunch hour, and that is it possible to reframe sugar as a luxury good again without it simply penalizing the poor and having little impact on middle and upper middle class consumers? What would it require, and what would it require of all of us, individually and collectively?
And we are right up on our lunch break, so we're going to reconvene at 12:15. The next lecture will start at 12:30. So enjoy your break, and we'll see you back here shortly.
Thanks very much.
Okay. Hi, everybody.
Hi there.
Tane Danger back here along with Meg Kurth.
Yep.
Fantastic. I love these conversations that happen right after our lectures. And that was a good one. We got anything else that you want to add, like from this morning?
I mean, I think it was really interesting in that Q&A to kind of see the merchants of doubt framework that we've seen in the past applied to like tobacco industry, to big oil, to like